Entrepreneur MBA Podcast purpose is to help existing business owners grow their companies past the 10 million in revenue per year benchmark. Here is your host, Stephen Halasnik.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Stephen Halasnik, and I am co-founder and managing partner of Financing Solutions. Financing Solutions is the leading provider of lines of credit for small businesses. Our line of credit program is easy, fast, and inexpensive, making it a great cash backup plan. From my own personal experience, I truly and really believe that every business should have a line of credit just in case, especially because the line of credit that we offer to our clients costs nothing to set up and nothing until it's being used. If you'd like to learn more about our line of credit program, please visit us at fscreditline.com. And if you decide to fill out our 2-minute no obligation application, please put the words in podcast in the reference section, and we will give you a $250 credit toward your line of credit when and if you use it. Or feel free to give us a call at 862-207-4118. On a personal level, I have over 25 years of experience in building companies. I've built several successful companies over the $10 million mark, including an Inc. 500 fastest growing company. I love speaking with successful business owners like today's guest and learning about what makes them and their business tick. If you like today's podcast, please feel free to share it with a friend, and please subscribe to us on your favorite podcasting app so you can hear future podcasts. Today, I'm excited to be speaking with David Hauser. David is a serial entrepreneur, speaker, and angel investor. He is best known for the co-founding of the Grasshopper Group, a virtual telephone service acquired by Citrix Systems for $170 million in 2015. David is a founding member of the National Entrepreneurs Day and has co-founded a number of tech companies, including Grasshopper, Chargeify, Spreadable, Pop Survey, Deck Foundry, and others. David's going to be talking, or we're going to be discussing, how and why to start another business when you have an existing business. David, welcome to today's Entrepreneurial MBA Podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So, David, you and I first met in 2007, and we went to something that some of our listeners had heard me talk about in our last podcast, which is called Birthing a Giants. Just so our listeners know, Birthing a Giants is the top 50 companies in the United States who are growing the fastest. And you go to MIT for a week executive program on entrepreneurship, and it's a 3-year program, and that's where we first met. Is that correct?
Yeah, for sure. It's a great program. It was really my introduction, or really solidification, of a lot of the things that we ended up implementing at Grasshopper. A lot of the stuff that you would read in Scaling Up or EOS or Traction, that kind of brought it all together for me.
I've mentioned it in other podcasts, and I'm going to mention it probably in every single one. If our listeners haven't thought about joining the Entrepreneur Organization, which is where we kind of found out about Birthing a Giants, you certainly should Google Entrepreneur Organization. It's just of great value. Now, David, in 2007, where were your companies at that point?
Yeah, so we were in our growth stage. So we were growing quickly. We didn't know how to manage growth. We had too many people. We had the wrong people. There were lots of problems, but it was all hidden by growth, right? So we spent a tremendous amount on marketing. Like, that's what we got very good at. Paid advertising and marketing, bringing customers in the door, signing them up, and then servicing them, right? So behind that growth, there was a lot of problems, right? And for good or for bad, when you're growing that fast, a lot of it's hidden. And we started to realize that if we didn't deal with those problems pretty quickly, we were not going to be able to continue to scale, right? And at that time, I think we were doing probably $5-6 million in sales. a year. I'd have to go back and look at the data, but each year we were roughly doubling, and the growth rate was starting to slow down a little bit because as you get bigger, it's harder to double. And some of these problems were starting to, surface where they were hidden before.
So was that, out of all the companies you started, what number was that one, Grasshopper?
So I did a few companies in high school, nothing that big. Then it kind of towards the end of high school, beginning of college, Return Path, which was recently acquired actually, built that, left pretty early on. So I wouldn't say like I built the company. I started it on day one with a bunch of other people and we all worked on it. But I wasn't involved in the day-to-day operations after that when I went to college. So Grasshopper was like the first company that was like big that I ran. Since then, I've either purchased or started probably 6 or 8, maybe even more different companies.
Has there been a common theme in the companies that you've been involved with?
Yeah, I think the common theme across the board is at least the ones that are successful are solving a real problem that I have, right? So Grasshopper was, I wanted a phone system that allowed me to sound more professional and stay connected with my customers that wasn't a cell phone at the time, and there weren't a lot of options. So I was solving my own problem. Chargeify, similarly, we provided recurring billing solutions for others. So, in essence, software as a service companies need to bill their customers or any industry on a regular monthly, quarterly, yearly basis. And we managed that software and built it. Again, that was a problem I was solving for myself. So I think that was the theme that has been throughout for the successful businesses. And we've tried lots of other things. I think the other key piece, even across like now we're working in a new industry in health and wellness, with a product called Superfat, that we're utilizing the same techniques that we used at Grasshopper, which is primary demand generation in terms of ads, marketing, and spending at the top of the funnel to drive traffic and people to buy the product, right? I think that is another piece that has been common across everything that's worked.
So, when you and I were kind of trading emails back and forth, I asked you to come on to the podcast, and I gave you a few topics that I thought would be good for our listeners to hear. Were you a little bit surprised that I selected how and why to start another business when you have an existing business?
No. So, I think this is a topic that is quite interesting because at Grasshopper, we experienced this a number of times. There's a bunch of reasons why, but I think one is an entrepreneur, we just get bored. Right? Yeah. Like after a while, we're like, even if we think this company that we're working on today has tremendous potential, we get bored. And then we create these stories around us to justify why we should do something else. Right. Mm-hmm. So at Grasshopper, started getting bored and like things are going great, which is the opposite of what you should be doing in terms of getting bored. But your mind starts running. So we started building this story of like, well, growth is slowing down. We've saturated the market, which is just crazy. We had, 25, 30,000 customers. Like that's not the saturation of the small business entrepreneur market by any stretch. But we told ourselves this story every year and ultimately started a bunch of companies, distracted ourselves, lost over $1 million in unsuccessful companies, and more importantly, distracted ourselves and the team working on things that just weren't helpful. And I think we lost a lot of potential growth at Grasshopper. But this is a scenario that I think happens again and again. And even in companies I invest in, I hear founders creating similar stories as they get to these stages.
Yeah, I'll tell you where it kind of came about. I was trying to see how I could bring this to our listeners. Like my experience, like I haven't had the big play like you have. Like I haven't had that $160 million sell. And, the companies that I've built have, got to 20 million, two of them. A couple of them got into 7 million. And I always was like, well, over time, I kind of figured out why I haven't been able to have that big play. And so what I had done over the years is just, okay, well, this company, I don't think is going to reach, this 60 million, 70 million, whatever, because it's in a service business. So let me just keep creating more and more companies, and combined, they'll reach that area. And whereas you've had the payoff of this big payout and sell, I think what I've learned, and please tell me what you think, is that sometimes the company itself that you start you can't get past a certain point.
Sure.
And, the opportunity is, okay, well, that company's going okay. Let's start something else. And it doesn't need to be another big play. It could be, another smaller play.
Sure.
So if you're going to do that, if you have an existing business and, you're thinking about, either I'm bored or I think I could do something else, what are some of the steps that you would recommend that you have to do first before you kind of look at that?
Yeah. So it's interesting because we spent a lot of time thinking about this because we built an internal group just to build new businesses. We called it Grasshopper Labs. We created a process for opportunity evaluation, for how do we create teams, how do we create process, all of these things. The first thing I would say before we even get to that is I would still challenge that I can't grow the current business more, right? Like I think that requires a few attempts at it before you say you can't. Right. And it's not to say that every business has that potential. I agree. There are some businesses that you get to a natural cap, right? And going beyond that cap may be possible, but may be unprofitable, may be, logistically very hard, doesn't make sense for the effort. Like there are reasons, right? But I would challenge it at first sight. Like maybe there's still something there. But let's assume that we've decided that there isn't, right? The first step that we learned to try to, and we did this wrong a number of times, is make sure we play to our strengths. Meaning, if today I sell enterprise things, the next thing I should do should be enterprise, not to small businesses, right? Because making that big shift in a new business is tremendously difficult. So play to the strengths you have today, and as much as possible, try to overlap those so you can get advice, share resources, do things like that to allow the business to get off the ground. That's where we saw the most success.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, looking back, I think one of the reasons I started other companies was also because over the 25-year career, and you've had the same, what I've seen is how recessions and growths in the industry in the United States have just such a huge effect on small businesses. And I think sometimes I wanted to hedge a bet. So maybe I'd pick an industry, that would do okay in a recession, just from the experience of, riding those waves. So, I mean, I think the other thing I wish I had done more of is, and I think I did this more 10 or 15 years in, was pick companies that had the potential to grow more.
Yeah. So, I think that's the second step, which is opportunity evaluation, right? So I think if we first understand what our strengths are and we build to those strengths, the next step is opportunity evaluation. So I think there's a lot of frameworks out there, people far smarter than I that have probably developed. But the way I looked at it was a very simplistic view, like size of market, right? Like I want a big enough market that it's interesting, or a small market that's growing. Those are kind of the two areas that are most interesting. And then some ability to capture that market, right? Now, when I say that, I think the key here is to understand that we could have a market that's worth $1 trillion, right? But if it's tremendously fragmented and, owned by one or two monopolies, like not the greatest thing to think about, right? I want some ability to target, get to, and sell to the target customer within that market. So I think those two things. And then there's a bunch of other stuff auxiliary, but like outside of that, that's the first steps in opportunity evaluation.
So let's take a step back. And when you started looking for other businesses to start, what was a day or week typically like? I mean, did you bucket time to start looking at other businesses?
No, I mean, like as an entrepreneur, like I just naturally do this. Like I had books, like handwritten stuff of like ideas. So I started like flipping back and thinking like, okay, what's interesting to me? And this is where we made one of our mistakes, which is I started solving problems that we had. And at that time we were a 25, 30 person organization. So I was solving mid-enterprise problems, not small business problems. And we were very good at selling to small businesses, right? So inherently the first things I wanted to do was solve my own problems. And it was the wrong set of stuff to be working on, to be honest.
Did you figure that out or did someone tell you?
No, we figured that out after we launched 3 businesses and failed. So, I'm sure someone did tell us and we just ignored them.
Yeah. Yeah. What I try to do is I try to spend 3 hours a week sitting down at a coffee shop, kind of going through that entrepreneurial spirit again of, thinking about what problems are out there that need to be solved, things that I'm seeing other companies doing that are doing really well out, any type of wave that's coming up I try to force myself to sit down and be entrepreneurial again, because, sometimes when you're building a company, you're so involved in operations and, marketing and just, that it feels fun again. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, for sure. I think that that's part of this kind of board story, right? Like, as entrepreneurs, we all kind of sit there and everything we see is a broken process. How do we fix it? How do I do better? What are the things that interest me today and tomorrow? That's kind of the natural thought process, right? And I think doing that is very healthy. And now what I've found more than anything is as I go through those exercises and I stop and I think, okay, I'm not going to start this business, but I think this is interesting. I think about how can I apply these techniques within the business, right? How can I think differently about how we hire customer service people? How can I be entrepreneurial and change the way we do that internally at the business to be able to gain, cost savings and service benefits and all of those things? That is where I've gotten a lot of gains recently.
So now looking back at your career, and you look back and you say, okay, if I'm going to pick new businesses again to get involved with, I'm sure you are looking at it. What are the things that you say, what, I'm not going to do that again? And I don't mean like an industry, mean like a learned lesson here.
Yeah. One, selling outside the industry I know. So like difference in sales process. So that's the change from small business to enterprise. I failed at that again and again. 2, chasing pure opportunity without passion. So like we found a bunch of things that we believed were big opportunities, but we weren't passionate about them, which meant the end product of what we produced, if it was software or service or whatever, had no real anything behind it. It was just like, right? Because we didn't love what it was that we were doing. I think those are the 2 most important.
Did you ever start a business that you were passionate about in the beginning and then it kind of slowly died out?
Yeah, so this is a great example. I think you mentioned it in the intro, Deck Foundry. I loved this business. And legitimately, I don't think it had a lot of potential even in the very beginning, but I felt like it was something I really wished that was around and I liked doing it. And the concept was quite simple, which was people want to create these decks for their businesses all the time. If it's, to pitch an investor, if it's just to pitch a new idea, and most people do it tremendously bad, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Both from a design perspective, but also a messaging perspective. And I love actually thinking through this. It's like the entrepreneurial process, right? Which is someone says, okay, I have this idea. And I'm like, okay, how would I pitch this idea to make someone excited? And I built a process for going through it and all this stuff. And we did a bunch of decks for people. A, it's not scalable. B, the market's not that big. It's hard to capture the people. There's very few repeat buyers. There's all sorts of problems. But I truly loved the business.
Yeah. Do you think that feedback is sometimes a disadvantage?
What feedback?
The feedback that when you presented in the angel funding groups, and they're like, "Oh, it's a terrible idea," and blah blah blah. Do you ever think that was like not helpful? That feedback?
Oh, that wasn't feedback to us, right? This is our customers, right? Like they do tremendously bad at pitching, and we were fixing that for them, right?
Yeah.
And creating these decks. But yeah, I do think that in general, listening to that early investor feedback can be very damaging, because what we care about as entrepreneurs launching a business is very different than what investors care about in business, right? So I think that it becomes a distraction. Right? You're like, well, they said to do this. And maybe it's right, maybe it's wrong. However, my belief is it's wrong for the current time and the current audience, which is the early stages of launching a business. Their incentives are very differently aligned than us as an entrepreneur.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because, our listeners on this podcast are typically, businesses under $6 million in size, and they may not have really gone out and done the angel funding route, or what that's about. when you're going for what type of company do you think you have to have in order to get angel funding?
So I think there's two questions here. One is, what do you need to do today to get funding? And one is, what should I be thinking about when I need to do like, when is the requirement for funding necessary, right? Yep. Those are two very different questions, meaning that there are ways to get money today, even if the business doesn't necessarily need it. And then there are businesses that do need it. I think businesses that need it are very large scale businesses that have two-sided marketplaces. So think TaskRabbit, right? You need people buying and people selling, or eBay or whatever. Businesses that really have a true need for first mover advantage, which I think there's very, very few of. Yep. Or businesses that have tremendous capital requirements that cannot be satisfied with debt or other types of structures. And again, I think these are very limited. Outside of that, my belief is most companies don't need funding and don't need to go through the process. But to understand what an angel investor or even a VC or A or B or C round investor looks for, the concept at the highest level is quite simple, which is they need 100 million ideas to billion ideas, and mostly billion. Right? Like they need to see this company as the potential of getting to billions of dollars, because in a portfolio approach, they expect 1/3 to die, 1/3 to kind of just do something, sit in the middle, and 1/3 to have the potential of getting there. And they only need one to get there, yep. Right? To $1 billion. So when you look at it from a portfolio approach, the incentives are very misaligned from an entrepreneur's perspective. And I wish there was better structures for this, where if you're one in a portfolio of 50 investments, you will be pushed very hard to either get to $1 billion or blow up along the way, which is not necessarily great for the founder or the employees, but it is great for the investor because they have a portfolio of 50 and you have a portfolio of 1, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's the misalignment. But yeah, I mean, look, that's what people are looking for. If you can invest in the next Uber, it doesn't matter what happens to the rest of the portfolio.
Yeah, my business partner and I, we went the angel funding route as far as looking at to invest in companies. And so we spent about 2 years doing it, and we looked at maybe 300 companies. We got 300 presentations. We actually started our own group to hear presentations. And, one of the things that my business partner kind of figured out was you had to be in 10 deals because 9 of them were going to fail. And the one that made it had to really make it big time. Yep. And what we saw was that everybody who was doing angel funding, giving money out in angel funding, everybody lost their money. And I know you've been doing angel, you've been involved in angel funding. Has it paid off for you?
So yeah, yes and no. So I've made probably about 80 to 100 investments. I would say as a total portfolio, I've roughly broken even on dollars. Yep. Now, I don't think that's a success at all. Like, that's a lot of money that could have been used for other things and whatever. However, my return now is very different than dollars for when I invest in these companies. I want to either get one of two things: learning, right? So I want to learn from someone I think is doing something interesting, a new industry, a new space, a new technique, the founder themselves, the group, the team, whatever it is, I want to learn. Or I want connections that will help me out in the future. Right.
Yeah.
So those two things in terms of return are very different than dollars. But yeah, on a pure dollar to cents basis, I would say it's roughly broken even, not factoring in opportunity cost or interest or anything else.
Yeah. The thing that we looked at, we thought as we got more and more involved, what we started to do is look at companies and say, okay, we like their idea. We think it could really turn into a nice small business of $30 or $40 million. And what we're going to do is come in and really teach them how to run a business.
Yep.
So it was, they have the great idea and we have the expertise and the cash. Right. Yep. And then we started moving in that direction. And, it was hard to find it. We found one company like that. And then when we finally got down to the due diligence, we honestly had a problem with the owner who we thought, wasn't the right person. So
yeah, I mean, it's hard to find that. So like I tried to come up with a little blend of that. One, like any investment I make, I'll offer up my time for that group or that founder or team as much as they want. Meaning, if you ask me to help with something, I will come into your office and sit there for 2 weeks and help you if you want that. If you don't ask me for anything, I will not do it. With the one caveat being that up front, I ask you to either read Scaling Up, Traction, one of these books, and commit to doing some of the practices. Right? Because I have found that the most successful companies that continue to grow have implemented some of these practices. So as part of my investment, that's been a much more current requirement, right? Like if you haven't read one of these books, go buy one and then let's talk.
It's funny when we were in Birthing a Giants class together, and I think that was a turning point for you. I think it was a turning point to me. Everybody in that class they were pretty determined to implement what we learned there, you know? And it's funny how you should say that Grasshopper turned after you started going to Birthing a Giants.
Oh, it was a major turning point. Major. Was it
because you implemented what was learned there, or did you bring in consultants? Not consultants, but there's guys we knew there like Cameron Harold and.
No, it's because we implemented stuff. Like I went back immediately and did daily meetings, weekly huddles. We did that immediately. Like that was the first thing. But then we went down the list and did a lot of stuff. We did some things differently. Immediately we figured out our core values and we started communicating those and integrating them into all of our processes. Now we do that as soon as we start a business, very different than when we started Grasshopper. We implemented performance reviews that integrated core values. We did, I'm trying to think of all the other things. We created a really great rhythm around goal planning on a quarterly basis and ended up creating a culture of exceeding our goals for, I think it was 26 straight quarters. There was a lot of great things that happened because of the stuff we actually implemented in the business. And now, we do that in all of the businesses that we run.
It's funny. You just reminded me. So I blog a lot and I'll write articles about entrepreneurship. And one of the entrepreneurship, one of the blogs I wrote was that if you want to go from 1 million to 5 million, and in 5 million to 10 million, it requires you to implement processes and procedures and best practices. Yep. That's the biggest difference. And it seems that even the bigger you get, the tighter those, what's the word? I hate to use processes, because to an entrepreneur, you hate the word process. But I don't know. What would you say?
Yeah. So, I do think that those are very important, and you change also from a command and control structure where you tell people exactly what to do to a much more collaborative structure where people are adding collectively to the entire process and saying, here's the things that we should do and here's why, right? And then actually implementing them. So I think there's a change there. Also for us, we also moved to a very different structure where we had a management team in place, people that were way smarter than myself and my business partner who started the business that had experience and allowed us to continue to scale that and to do things like, it sounds simple, but doing, weekly one-on-ones with the team and these things, it sounds easy to do. However, if you actually watch someone who's amazing at it compared to someone who's okay at it, the difference is massive. Yeah. Right. And so things like that, as we started to build out a management team, got better and better.
Yeah. I remember one of the things that I've kind of done well at, and there's not a ton, but is that I've always tried to do a good job of making sure the business is running well on its own and handing it off to somebody before I moved on to thinking about another business. Yep. I think, that's one of the first steps. I think you have to, and Michael Gerber, who is kind of, it's kind of, he's not that popular anymore, but he was a famous business consultant, and he actually had one of the largest small business consulting companies in the world. He used to say you have to work on your business and not in your business. Yeah. And I don't think, correct me if you think I'm wrong here, but I don't think you can move on to thinking of something else until you're working on a business or on your business, not in your business. Is that?
Yeah. For sure. Like, you can't be taking customer service calls and dealing with escalated issues and things like that, right? There should be a process and a procedure and a team member that is responsible for that and reports the, high level responses and issues back to you. Right. I think that's like the most clear difference, but there's so many examples of that in the business, right? Like, I run into people that are still dealing with the, day-to-day accounting, and then they have an accountant review it. Like, all of that needs to be off your plate if you want to be working on a business, right? And strategically thinking and setting goals and priorities with, like you said, having enough time to then do something else.
Yeah. What's next for you? Where are you headed?
Yeah, so I spent quite a bit of time after Grasshopper thinking about what that was, and I got involved in health and wellness. I changed my life pretty significantly. I wrote a book, Unstoppable. I also got involved in a company called Superfat that provides a small-size nut butter product for the keto and even vegan crowd. Also just purchased a business that provides virtual assistants for other people. So we're going to be launching that really soon under a new brand. Excited for that. So, a lot of different things. The one thing I've changed too is I've pulled back on investing quite a bit. So I really only invest in companies doing over $1 million a year in revenue that are profitable and growing. So by default, it's a filter that gets rid of a lot. But I do still make 1 to maybe 3 investments a year, very, very specifically in these kind of companies.
Where do you hear about those companies that you're investing in?
Some of them come to me. Some of them come through my network because people know my filter, right? So they just know, like, these are the only things to send me to look at. Mm-hmm. Others, I've kind of gone after 1 or 2 that I've said, hey, I really love what they're doing for one reason or another. Not all of them pan out as an investment, but they've all been great connections. So that's been good. So it's a combination. But again, because it's only 1 to 3, it's not an active, like, I need to go out and find 100.
Yeah. So I have to ask, because I saw that you wrote the book Unstoppable, and what kind of pushed you to write the book?
Yeah, so I never would have expected to write a book, actually, and it was actually far more difficult than I ever thought. But so what was really happening is, like, I made a lot of changes in my life. I used to do Ironmans and triathlons and, try to lose weight, and it never worked. So, being frustrated and, disappointed in putting in so much effort and it not working, I really looked for a different way. I found things that worked for me. And again, after I had lost kind of 35, 40 pounds, people said, oh my God, what did you do? What'd you do? And I realized I kept explaining to people what I did. And it wasn't all that helpful. What actually was much more helpful was this framework that I had created for how to do self-optimization and self-testing, which is really just a continuous improvement or A/B testing framework that we use in our businesses applied to our own selves and our own health. And my kind of core value and core purpose in life today is empowering others. At Grasshopper, it was empowering others to succeed, specifically entrepreneurs with the services that we provided. But I wanted to be able to give back and have an answer to people like, what did you do? And the answer, it doesn't really matter what I did, but here's the process I followed.
That's pretty cool. I mean, it's kind of a different subject, but I was watching this video and, you wouldn't expect much out of it when you hear the title, which was How to Develop Your Life Purpose in 2 Minutes. Right. And you hear that and you're like, ugh, it's another slogan or, And I happened to watch it, and what it said was, when someone's life purpose is about helping others instead of themselves, they tend to rank themselves 80% more happy than the other group.
Yeah.
Yep. And so, I mean, I'm actually trying to change my life purpose a little bit more, and to stop being a little bit less about me and my family and a little bit more about, how can I incorporate, giving back other people. It seems that you're making that transition, or you did that a while ago though with the company. Yeah.
I mean, I like, it is what kind of energizes me. So I identified that early on, but I think there is a shift that happens both from a time horizon perspective as we get older, but also from a stage of life perspective as we may or may not have more wealth. and things like that about how we start thinking about other people. And I think it does relate a lot to happiness. And one of the key things in my life now is kind of return on happiness compared to return on dollars, right? Yeah. So once you have enough money, and it's not that much money that you need to have to just not worry about, the house you live in and the car you drive. You kind of have the things you need. I think the shift to how do I concentrate on personal happiness and then happiness of people around me is the next logical thing.
Yep. Well, cool. Let's come back. I know I got off topic a little bit but it's very interesting where your life has, led you. Just to summarize, if you're thinking about starting another business, you have an existing business, some of the things we talked about is, make sure you're studying, what's my wheelhouse? Where should I stay? What do I like doing? What do I love doing? Make sure your existing business, you're not working in the day-to-day, the processes and procedures are there. What else would you say?
I think the other big thing that is missing there is just go out and do something, right? So to me, it's just one little step forward. And the best example of this at Grasshopper is when we started, we had no experience in telecom, right? And we were providing a phone system, which is telecom. And if we just kind of sat there and talked about it and tried to figure it out, nothing would have happened. So we just started building something and started learning about it. So I think the key is action over talking. And whatever that is, the little actions start to add up. And that's where we learn along the journey.
Great advice. I completely agree. So today I would like to thank so very much David for coming on to today's podcast. If you like today's podcast, please feel free to share it with a friend and also subscribe on your favorite podcasting apps. And of course, if you are looking for a line of credit for your business, you can call us at 862-207-4118 or visit our website at fscreditline.com. David, if anybody wants to get in touch with you, how would they go about doing that?
Unstoppablebook.com is the easiest way. The book's also available on Amazon and Audible and all of those things. I also have a weekly email list that I kind of send out 3 to 5 things that I'm thinking about watching, doing, reading, and you can subscribe on the page there. That's been a great way to connect with a lot of people, and the list has grown pretty substantially over the last 6 to 8 months.
Yeah, I read your list every single time. Your newsletter every single time.
Thanks.
Yeah, it's fun seeing what you're doing. So anyway, David, again, thanks for coming on. And I want to thank our listeners. And please remember, everybody, just keep getting better.